Good afternoon. Today, what we're going to talk about is how to use the new system that we've developed for turning our veterans' urns on the lathe. We had previously been going through a 4-step process where you turned a tenon on one end and then you flip that around between centers and you used a cone. You turned your counterbore in the bottom of the urn, and then you flip that back around and mounted the tenon end to get that counterbore cut. Then you flip it back around and mount a faceplate in the counterbore and turn the rest of the urn. Very complicated, lots of room for things to become uncentered, complicated for folks to follow. Not the safest method in the world, that's for sure. And turning is inherently got safety challenges because you're spinning a mass of wood at a high speed. So one of the gentlemen in the Gold Coast Club came up with a new method where you use expansion jaws in a chuck to grab the inside of the urn and do that by setting it up on the tailstock of the lathe so that you can turn that counterbore. And then once that counterbore is turned, you then flip it around, you mount the urn and the chuck on the headstock and turn the rest of the urn, which we're going to show you how to do, and I'm going to show you all the tools that you need to be able to do that. So first, you need a chuck, and you need a set of jaws large enough to expand out to cover the inside of the urn and expand out, because these are going to be your gripping surfaces. Okay. Next, you need a live end that fits in your tailstock, and you need an adapter so that your chuck can screw on here. So it's going to have the same thread that the headstock on your lathe has and that your chuck that you're using has. And that adapter screws on to the live end. The type of live end you need to use would be one like this that has a 3/4 inch 10 TPI thread that this adapter mounts on, so that you end up with this assembly. And you want to make sure you get it on there securely. Okay. Then the other two things you're going to need is you're going to need a drive end for your headstock, and you're going to need a regular live end for your tailstock in order to complete the project. The tools you're going to need to turn that counterbore, you're going to need what's this tool called? A parting tool, excuse me. You need a parting tool. You'll need a bowl gouge, and you'll need a spindle gouge to complete the project. And I'll show you how to use those as we do. And of course, the other thing you're going to need is a lathe, big enough to turn something that is about 8 to 10 inches in diameter. Okay, we're over here at the lathe, and what we're going to do is get the lathe set up so that we can turn this urn. We have our live end with our adapter that we use for the chuck, so it can mount on the tailstock of the lathe. We have our chuck. You get that mounted on here. Everything, there we go. This screwed on. So the chuck is mounted up. Now what we'll do, it's helpful if you put some spacers inside the urn that you're going to turn so that the chuck bottoms against those, so that you can get a good pressure on the headstock to drive the urn when you're cutting out this recess in the bottom. So we'll tape those in place just to hold them till we get pressure. There's one. There's the other one. Okay, and we'll get a drive end in the headstock. Move this back a bit. There. Oops, my tool. And luckily there's a ball end on here. There. And that's pretty crooked, as you can see, so we'll get it straightened up. There. All right, that's it. So we're up against our headstock with the drive center. Get this nice and tight. It's also a good test of how well this is glued up if it doesn't crack at this point. We'll just make sure we've got good engagement of our drive end. Push this in a little bit more. There we go. So now we're ready to true up the bottom and cut our counter bore for the plywood bottom that gets fit in the end here when we're done. Use the short. You always want to cut this counter bore with a super sharp tool. If it wasn't freshly sharpened before you start, go over and sharpen it before you start. It makes all the difference in the world to how quickly this cuts and how with what ease it is cut as well. There, so we've got our depth on the counter bore. It's about the right width to accommodate the plywood insert. So now what we're going to do is just true up the bottom here a little bit more with the bowl gouge. And then we'll flip this around. Once again, sharp tools make this so much easier and a whole lot more fun. There, bottom's trued, counterbore's cut. So we leave this mounted on the chuck because it's all centered right now. And what we're going to do is back the headstock away, take the chuck off of the tailstock and mount it on the headstock. So it's driven directly, and then we're going to use a different adapter in the tailstock. So we take the drive end out because we don't need it anymore, and we will hopefully unscrew this from the adapter. There, and you're now on the headstock safely. So now what we want to do is take this off and put on a regular live end. We're just going to use this to support this end of the urn while we get it turned, and also to make sure that it recentered properly, which it did. There, so we'll get that in. There, just gives a little bit of, you should always turn with both ends whenever you can. Provides a lot of support that way. So I'm going to use a different tool rest now, bigger one. Get it as close as you can without hitting. Check. Looks pretty good. So we're ready to turn. This particular glue up is Jatoba, Brazilian cherry, and it's quite hardwood. And it's also very, very dry. By rights, I should be wearing a mask, but because I'm talking, I'm not. My objective right now is purely to get this round and get rid of all the flat sides. It's looking pretty close. Almost there. Okay. It's nice and round at this point. Good. All the flats are gone. So what we can do is we can put the details on the bottom, shape the side, and then lastly we'll shape the top and then make the round dome on the top. That's the order in which you do these. It works out best. And then you end up with a nice urn when you're done. Okay. The idea is to use sharp tools, take light cuts, get this as smooth as you can with your tools. It makes it a lot easier when it comes time to sand. It's a lot less work when it gets to sanding if you sharpen your tools and take your time to use the tools properly. So to add the details down at the bottom, I'm going to use a spindle gouge. They do a nice job of shaping these. And making them really smooth. So you should have very little sanding to do when you're done. Now we'll shape the side of the urn. Okay, that's pretty close to the shape. I'm going to need to resharpen this tool and take a final pass at this. But it's nice and smooth, ready for sandpaper, and you can easily, start sanding this at 100 grit or even 120, 150. Okay, so now we're going to cut out the cove in the top, get that cut, then we'll cut the step, and then the last step is doing the dome. So quickly show that step. Basically have our cove cut, and now I need to sharpen this. I can't do much more without it, but normally you would come in and cut your step same way and then shape your dome by dragging this or by using a spindle gouge to shave away the top layer to get a nice smooth surface. Okay, and that'll be the end for this video. It's all wrapped up. You'll have a nice, beautiful urn complete using this new method that's nice and safe. Thank you.